with this type of exploitation, Mr. Speaker. Legislation is one thing. I understand I'm running out of time, Mr. Speaker, and I'll have some more time at the end of question period, I suspect, to be able to conclude my remarks.
Minutes after question period, but now it's 11 o'clock, so we'll move on to statements by members. Déclaration de député, the honourable member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, March 21st, I had the honour of speaking at the Wildwood Branch 149 Royal Canadian Legion's annual rally in my riding of Yellowhead. It was there I had the pleasure of meeting a wonderful young lady named Ruby Huddleston, a longtime volunteer and Legion member. Upon meeting Ruby, she informed me she was having her 90th birthday on March 26th and invited me to her birthday party to be held at Wildwood's local community hall. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend my sincere wishes for a very special 90th birthday for Ruby. I salute you, Ruby, and all Legion volunteers for all the work they do, are doing, and will be doing on behalf of our veterans. God bless and happy birthday.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne-Plainville. Mr. Speaker, this week we learned that the CBC has eliminated another 100 jobs because of budget cuts by this government. That is now 535 jobs abolished or done away with in French services in a year, even if the minister has convinced herself of the opposite. The people, this is terrible. The people of my riding joined thousands of Quebecers and Canadians across Canada who care about our broadcaster and want to keep this cultural flagship. The Théâtre de Vieux-Vervonne even adopted a resolution to denounce the CBC cuts to the CBC by the Conservatives. We need to guarantee stable multi-year funding for the CBC, and that's what we'll do when we form the first NDP government next October. Thank you.
Okanagan, Coquihalla.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to take a moment today to recognize our local media. Often working with very limited budgets and having to cover a huge diversity of different subjects over large geographical areas is a challenge. Yet it is a challenge they meet as it is a world filled with deadlines. One such local journalist in Okanagan, Coquihalla is Dorothy Brotherton. For over 2 decades now, Dorothy has been a dedicated professional, telling the stories of the Okanagan and keeping citizens up to date and informed. But as one of the longest-serving journalists in our region, Dorothy has made the decision to accept a new assignment, that of a full-time grandmother. I hope the House will join with me in recognizing Dorothy Brotherton's long-time service to her community as a journalist and our best wishes in retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for York West.
Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to rise and offer my best wishes to those preparing to celebrate Vaisakhi here in Canada and around the world. Vaisakhi is celebrated annually by Hindus and Buddhists for several reasons, including as a way of reflecting and looking forward to the prosperity and to the novelty of the year ahead. Vaisakhi is also an important observance for our friends within the Sikh community, as it recalls the founding of the Khalsa Sikh community in 1699. At its core, Vaisakhi is a day of family and community. It is a time to gather at gurdwaras to pray, to read from sacred scriptures, and to contemplate the blessings of today while looking to the future with confidence and hope. As the faithful mark this special occasion at vibrant parades, including many of us here in the House and other Canadians and other processions, on behalf of the Liberal caucus, I offer my best wishes for a successful year ahead. Thank you.
Here. The honourable member for Ottawa Orleans. Oh. Ottawa Orleans.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. The 8th annual Hearts of Gold Gala to honour the most deserving community volunteers in Ottawa Orleans will be held next May 20th at the Orleans Royal Canadian Legion, the friendliest legion in the region.
This gala lets us pay tribute to the volunteers of Ottawa Orleans for the energy and imagination they devote to making our community the best place to live.
Over the past 7 years, 484 dedicated volunteers have been honored at this gala. Of those, 9 received Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee Medal. Ottawa Orleans benefits from the work of 300 organizations whose lifeblood is their volunteers. Ainsi,
Nominations are being received now, and anyone who would like to nominate a volunteer in Ottawa Orleans for their dedication and service over the past year has until April 20th to do so.
call me at 995-1800. When I'm at the office, I pick up my own phone and I answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Saint-Constant. I'd like to highlight a remarkable sign of solidarity by a citizen of my riding who undertook the ambitious project of offering a house to the Corbeil-Clément family. They had the misfortune of seeing their house burned to the ground last December. With no insurance and a heavily mortgaged property, they experienced the worst possible Christmas. But the electrical contractor, Michel Hainaut, was touched by the situation, and he gave himself the mission of rebuilding the fire-gutted home with the help of volunteers. He collected $170,000, and a week after the drama, Mr. Hainaut unveiled during a benefit evening the amount gathered for the reconstruction of the house. Therefore, he was able to, with his team, give many gifts to the family, as well as a trip and complete furnishings for the house, whose construction work will wrap up around mid-April. Many thanks to Mr. Hainaut and his team for having moved heaven and earth to transform what was a nightmare into a real fairy tale. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Palliser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadians will be riveted by the playmaking at the 2015 Ford World Curling Championships over 9 days starting this Saturday. I know that Moose Jaw native Pat Simmons, along with John Morris, Carter Rycroft, Nolan Thiessen, will proudly represent Canada. The foursome delivered a stellar performance in the Brier final just a couple of weeks ago. 12 countries will be represented at the 56th Annual Championships taking place in Halifax. Along with Canada, there are also teams from the United States, Switzerland, Sweden, Scotland, Russia, Norway, Japan, Italy, Finland, China, and the Czech Republic. Mr. Speaker, I call on my colleagues to join me in wishing Team Canada all the best as they wear the maple leaf, aim for the button, and reach for the world title. Go, Canada, go!
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow tens of thousands of people will visit Elmira to celebrate the 51st annual Elmira Maple Syrup Festival. This festival is the largest of its kind in the world. Over 2,000 dedicated volunteers devote hundreds of hours to make the day a huge success. All proceeds from the festival are returned to charitable organizations. I'm extremely proud of the festival and the incredible work they do to give back to our community. The Elmira Community Nursery School, Epilepsy Waterloo Wellington, Child Witness Center, Waterloo Region Suicide Prevention Council, Women's Crisis Service of Waterloo Region, and Woolwich Counseling Center are just a few of the organizations that have benefited from the great work of the festival. So join us tomorrow to enjoy the Sugar Bush Tours, pancake flipping competitions, the famous outdoor mall, antiques, crafts, and of course, gallons of fresh Canadian maple syrup. From 10,000 attendees 50 years ago to the more than 64,000 that came out last year, let's make 2015 the biggest year yet. My deepest thanks and appreciation to all who make the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival the best and biggest in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Beaches East York.
Mr. Speaker, on March 7th, the lovely man and the former MP for Beaches and Beaches Woodbine died. This chamber was Neil Young's place of work from 1980 to 1993, but Neil lived his life at the heart of the beach, and he will carry on in the hearts of many in Beaches East York. Neil was what we all ought to be as people and as politicians. Excuse me, modest, determined, ambitious for those he represented, not for himself, loving to those who needed care and caring to those he loved. And what I loved most especially about Neil, joyful in the face of adversity. Robbie Burns wrote Neil's epitaph, and I paraphrase only slightly. An honest man now lies at rest, as ever God with his image blessed, a friend of man, a friend of truth, the friend of age and guide of youth. Few hearts like his with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. Rest in peace, Neil, and thank you.
The honourable member for Whitby, Oshawa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It won't be long now until the world's best female soccer players are here in Canada. And I'm looking forward to next week's launch of the first ever Coca-Cola FIFA Women's World Cup Trophy Tour. And it's going to 12 cities across Canada. Wow. So those that visit the fan experience will have an opportunity for fun, games, and can have their photo taken with the actual FIFA trophy. And I know a tour like this will also inspire Canadians to get active and to make sports and activity a part of their lives. And of course, it will build excitement ahead of the tournament. I'd like to thank Coca-Cola Canada and its president for supporting opportunities like this. It's a great example of community support and business leadership. And of course, I'm wishing the tour great success and encourage Canadians to visit the fan experience in their community and wish Canada's national women's team the success in the tournament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Laval and Les Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in this chamber today to highlight the 50th anniversary of my hometown, Laval, where I grew up and where I've worked and had the opportunity to represent today in the House of Commons. Our city, which will have the pleasure of claiming one of the great prime ministers of Canada, the member for Outremont, is a must-visit destination. It's for its people, its artistic, cultural diversity, and artisans, and community commitment. It's a place that knows how to leave its mark. Over the last 50 years, the people of Laval, who are committed, determined, and welcoming, have known how to build a city that is prosperous and a good place to live. I'm very proud to represent my constituents at the Canadian Parliament, and with the same pride, I invite the members of this chamber to participate in the festivities that will be unfolding at home over the course of the year, and that I hope they'll join me in saying Happy 50th Birthday, Laval.
Member for Saskatoon, Rosetown, Bigger.
First Nations, like all Canadians, want and deserve transparency and accountability from their governments. 2 years ago today, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and I were very pleased to announce that the First Nations Financial Transparency Act received royal assent. The passage of this important legislation into law represents a milestone for those First Nation community members who have been calling for greater accountability and transparency. This act is helping to deliver more effective, transparent, and accountable governments, which will contribute to stronger, more self-sufficient, and prosperous communities. I am pleased to report that more than 96% of bands have complied. Mr. Speaker, Canadians, including First Nations, support greater transparency from their leadership. It is shameful that the Liberal leader has said he would scrap a law that empowers members to access the basic information on their community finances. On this side of the House, we will continue to stand firm on accountability and transparency for all Canadians.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
This week, a resolution calling on the Canadian Parliament to apologize for the Kamagata Maru incident was unanimously passed by the Punjab Assembly. Last year, we commemorated the centennial anniversary of the incident. However, the Canadian government has yet to issue a formal apology in the House. The Kamagata Maru incident was a dark moment in Canada's past. In 1914, 352 passengers aboard the steamship were denied entry into Canada based on a discriminatory immigration policy. The ship was forced to return to India, and as a result, 19 passengers were killed. In 2008, the Liberal Party introduced a motion that was unanimously passed by the House of Commons, calling on the Canadian government to issue a formal apology. On May 7, 2014, in reference to the Kamagata Maru, I stated, as we mark what will be the 100th anniversary of this tragic event, I would ask that the Prime Minister provide a formal apology here on the floor of the House of Commons this month. The Prime Minister has not responded. With Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, visiting Canada next month, it is time that the Canadian government issue a formal apology on the floor of the House of Commons. If not, the leader of the Liberal Party will provide a formal apology if we are elected into government later this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Brampton Springdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mothers and fathers should be able to make the important decisions that affect their own children. That's why our new family tax cut and enhanced universal childcare benefit will give 100% of the families with kids an average of more than $1,100 per year to spend on their priorities, Mr. Speaker. The majority of benefits flow to low and middle income families. Our government trusts parents to invest in their children. The contrast is simple. The Liberals believe bureaucracy knows best when it comes to Canadian families. Both the Liberals and the NDP want to see this money back in the hands of bureaucrats. Mr. Speaker, mums and dads don't need to be told how to spend their money on their children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
When the leader of the official opposition stood in this House and asked pointed and important questions about Canada's legal justification for its planned intervention in Syria, the Prime Minister had the audacity and immaturity to respond by dismissing this serious question as a joke. Abiding by international law when sending our soldiers into conflict zones is not a laughing matter. So far, we've heard many competing legal justifications from this government, all dubious at best. It's the same cavalier approach that the Conservatives are taking on Bill C-51, dismissing concerns about personal liberties and suggesting that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is simply a matter of discretion. Canadians have had enough of this. They want a government that will respect international law and protect their rights and freedoms. And that's precisely what an NDP government will do.
The honourable member for Glengarry, Prescott Russell.
Monsieur le Président, les familles canadiennes.
Speaker, Canadian families recognize that the Conservative government is the only party that understands the needs of parents. That is why we introduced tax decreases for family, that we have improved the universal child care benefit, and we are providing support to thousands of families that have children.
Tax relief for Canadian families in modern Canadian history. And Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of these benefits will go to low or medium income families. Sadly, the NDP and Liberals have not followed our lead in supporting Canadian families to choose the type of childcare that works for them. Instead, the NDP have pledged to undo our support and impose a one-size-fits-all bureaucratic scheme that fails to do anything for 90% of families. And the Liberals, well, simply put, they will take this money away. That's shameful, Mr. Speaker. The NDP and Liberals need to stop listening to elites and start listening to real Canadian parents. Our government remains the only one that supports mums and dads in making the best decisions for their families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even if the Conservatives have limited the number of witnesses and cut short debate at committee, we've been able to hear many witnesses, many experts from across the country, almost all of whom have reconfirmed what we've been saying since the beginning. The Conservatives have got it wrong by refusing to listen to criticism of Bill C-51. Why is the Conservative government moving forward with such a bill, even though their own witnesses are calling for major changes to the bill? Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, first of all, the reason that we have presented this bill is to protect Canadians, to protect our country. And we are now in the committee process. It's necessary to continue that process, to hear from witnesses, to hear from those who appear before the committee, and we are respecting that process.
The honourable member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Well, don't take our word for it, Mr. Speaker. 90% of Conservative witnesses said changes were needed. Now, Bill C-51 is so flawed that even the former head of CSIS Intelligence says that more oversight is needed. Unlike the minister, he understands that when CSIS is being given sweeping new powers, it needs increased oversight and review to go along with them. It's a very simple concept. Will the minister accept our amendments to improve oversight, as 95% of all witnesses and 90% of Conservative witnesses have recommended?
The honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr.
Speaker, let's take a look at what some of the witnesses have actually said. This is from Ms. Raheel Raza, president of Muslims Facing Tomorrow. She said, quote, legislation is important to combat radicalization. We need better tools to track jihadists who travel overseas. Let's listen to what the director, Mr. Ray Boivin, the former assistant director to CSIS, had to say. C-51 will be a very effective tool and way to get jihadist propaganda off the internet. Mr. Speaker, these are the voice of the experts who are saying C-51 will be an important way in which this government can continue to protect Canadians.
The honourable member for Burnaby to Westminster.
And almost every single one of them said more oversight is needed, Mr. Speaker. They're just not listening. And that's the kind of answer that means that the more Canadians hear about this bill, the less they like it. So Conservatives should really listen to the witnesses, including prominent First Nation witnesses. Everyone from National Chief Perry Bellegarde to tribal councillors and activists have been clear that C-51 poses a real threat to the ability of First Nations to defend their rights and title. Why is the minister refusing to acknowledge that C-51 threatens First Nations rights, and why such disrespect to First Nations, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like so much of the rhetoric coming from members opposite, that is absolute nonsense. This is a bill not designed whatsoever to impact or affect peaceful protest or those who may take issue with government. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill aimed directly at giving our security agencies the necessary support tools, legislation, and resources to go after people who are directly targeting Canada. Yep. Those are terrorists, Mr. Speaker. Yes. Those who have in the past and may in the future impact directly on the safety of Canadians inside and outside our country. That's why we're bringing forward the legislation. That's why we're participating in an important international mission, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Halle-Ulmer. The more we study C-51 at committee, the more we realize that the Conservatives haven't done their homework. Yesterday we learned that all of the changes to the no-fly list were made without consulting airlines. Those are the people who will be in charge of applying those changes. That's not rigorous preparation, Mr. Speaker. Why have the Conservatives written such a half-baked bill? Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, the honourable member should and would be aware that we have in fact consulted broadly, but let's not lose sight of the urgency of this matter. Let's not lose sight of the fact of what happened here in October, what has happened, Mr. Speaker, in other countries. These are terrorist actions that go directly to the safety and security of Canadians. And similarly, the actions that we are taking with regard to the mission overseas, these are actions consistent with Canadia's storied history and past in promoting and protecting interests at home and abroad.
The honourable member for Halle-Ulmer. After 2 weeks of study, problem after problem with Bill C-51, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, what we have before us is a botched bill. Any government worth its salt would go back to the drawing board. Why are the Conservatives insisting on passing a bill that puts our freedoms at risk and which, at the end of the day, simply won't work? Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the member is wrong with that evaluation of this bill.
Comprehensive measures contained in Bill C-51 that directly go to the heart and effort of protecting Canadians, whether it be giving our security forces greater ability to promote and protect Canadians' interests, to preempt some of those actions, to change the legislation with insertions in the criminal code that allow us to do more to prevent radicalization and recruitment online. Mr. Speaker, this is a comprehensive, important bill before Parliament. It is getting rigorous examination before committee. I would urge the honourable member to actually take the time to read it and delve a little deeper herself.
The honourable member for Westmount Ville-Marie.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important roles of the government is to inspire confidence in the Canadian economy. But we see clearly today that the confidence of businesses and consumers is fragile. The problem is that not only have the Conservatives not been getting the job done, but they refuse to talk about the economy. They've indefinitely delayed the budget because they have no plan. The finance minister can't be found, and he's simply stopped answering questions about the economy and hasn't answered any for 2 months. So when will we see a budget? The Honourable Minister of State.
Again, our government has a low-tax plan for jobs and growth for all sectors of the Canadian economy. That plan, Mr. Speaker, is working very well. It will return Canada to balanced budget this year. The Minister has been very clear that we will not bring forward a budget until at least April. But, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can be certain that when this budget is tabled here in this House, that it will be a budget that will continue on the same plan of lowering taxes, creating jobs, and coming to balance. Contrast that with the opposition that is a high-debt, high-spend party, Mr. Speaker, and also believes that budgets balance themselves.
For West Ville Marie.
Mr. Speaker, that vaunted plan is clearly not working very well. Outside of a full recession, we've had the slowest consecutive 15 months of job growth on record. TD says things aren't going to get much better on the jobs front for 2 years. CIBC says we have the lowest quality job creation in a generation. The economy could use some confidence, not deafening silence. Where is the federal budget, and why has the finance minister chosen not to answer questions in this House for 2 months now?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Speaker, it's exactly what we've been saying consistently, that the global recovery is fragile, and our Conservative government is focused on what matters most to Canadians. That economic action plan is a plan that helps create jobs, that keeps money in the pockets of Canadians, that lowers taxes for all Canadians. We know that the opposition would take those tax cuts away. They take pension income splitting away. They take universal child care benefits away. They'd continue to spend and raise taxes. Mr. Speaker, that would cost jobs. That's not what this economy needs. That's not. Canadians know they're better off with this Conservative government.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Ville Marie.
Mr. Speaker, one of the government's most important jobs is to instill a sense of confidence in the economy, and that is clearly not happening now. In fact, Conservatives outright refuse to talk about the economy at all. They have indefinitely postponed their budget because they have no plan, and the Finance Minister simply stopped answering questions 2 months ago. The fiscal situation facing governments in Alberta and Quebec did not prevent them from making tough decisions and presenting budgets on time. Why is this government running away from its responsibilities?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the minister says, or the member says, we are talking about the economy. We're talking about the fact that Canada's Economic Action Plan has created 1.2 million net new jobs since the lowest part of the recession. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about the economy and saying that we're going to keep taxes down. We're going to keep money in the pockets of Canadians. We're going to keep money for the families of Canadians. We're going to keep money in the pockets of pensioners and seniors, Mr. Speaker. We know that that party would take it all away. They would tax and spend. That's why they're looking forward to a budget. They believe that a budget is an opportunity to take from Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Scotland, one to Fuqua.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after 2 weeks of testimony, one thing that really stands out is what a bad job the Conservatives did in drafting C-51. Witness after witness has revealed how flawed the bill is. At committee, we learned that Conservatives hadn't even consulted Canadian Airlines on changes to the no-fly list. Here's what we heard from them at committee, that the changes in C-51 are likely unworkable and could end up costing airlines and travelers millions without making us safer. How could the minister fail to do such basic due diligence in drafting this bill?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, with all legislation, it is, of course, incumbent upon the Department of Justice, other departments to give input into this legislation. Let's not overlook the intent here. This is about sharing information amongst government departments. It's about ensuring that our security agencies have the ability to follow the trail of terrorists, Mr. Speaker, to preempt, make arrests, prevent these acts of terror before they occur on Canadian soil, thus keeping Canadians safer. It's fine for the members of opposition to sort of throw these wild allegations and try to scare Canadians into thinking somehow that this bill is going to harm their rights. There is a balance struck, judicial oversight, and, Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Bellin. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we finished a marathon at committee. listening to important testimony on Bill C-51. 45 of the 48 witnesses that we heard either asked us to amend the bill or to simply go back to the drawing board. It's time to act responsibly to deal with the problem of terrorism and radicalization. Will the minister listen to the concerns of experts on C-51 and make the major changes that are needed to the bill? The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, I want to thank that honourable member and the members of the committee who have taken part in a very comprehensive study of this bill, a bill that does contain a number of extremely important provisions. We've heard from experts on the bill, and I thank her and members who have participated in what was obviously a very intense study of this legislation. We've heard from a number of important witnesses. We're proceeding now, Mr. Speaker, with the regular process that occurs with the examination of bills such as this. This is legislation that we believe sincerely will make Canadians safer. That's why it's before Parliament. That's why we have presented it in such a way. And I do encourage members opposite to support this important legislation.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau.
Down this road before, Mr. Speaker, a badly drafted bill from the Conservatives that threatens the Charter is just going to land the government in court. The Canadian Bar Association said it best. C-51 is clearly unconstitutional. Why has the Minister of Justice, our Attorney General, lent his support to such a flawed and dangerous piece of legislation when it's his job to ensure the Constitution is respected?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of Justice. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is the advice and the input from the Department of Justice and myself as Attorney General and Justice Minister that this bill, in fact, is constitutional, will meet the Charter screen. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to come back to the point that she made with regard to the Canadian Bar Association. There is some reference in their testimony that judges will somehow be put in a compromised position. I remind her, and she, as a practicing lawyer, will know, judges each and every day are called upon to make assessments of evidence presented for warrants before them. Mr. Speaker, this is completely consistent with the tradition of the judiciary and the necessity. It should give her great solace and comfort, and the Canadian Bar Association, to know that judiciary are so involved in this process.
Honourable Member for Gatineau.
To put judges in a position to accept to do certain things illegally? Anyway, sur un autre registre.
On another register, this morning, in a split decision, 5-4, the Supreme Court of Canada decided that the Government of Canada can destroy data from the gun registry. But experts are unanimous that this destruction was a political decision. For the judges in the minority, the federal government, in its desire to destroy the data, wants to hurt the provinces. I wouldn't be very proud of that. Quebec was clear. The data is important for public safety. Will the Conservative government give the data to Quebec and be open federalists? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Canada has been very clear in this decision, and we are pleased that they upheld the decision of the Quebec Court of Appeal in this matter. I would like to remind the member opposite that we have a strong system of gun control in Canada, and our government has toughened laws and penalties for those who commit crimes with guns. We will continue to ensure safe and sensible firearms legislation.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, in January of this year, the Canadian government announced that it would resettle 10,000 Syrian refugees over the next 3 years. However, we know that the government only just met its 2013 targets of just 1,000 refugees, and that was 2 years late. And we still don't know, for example, when the first refugees will come or how many refugees will be supported by the state. So will the minister put in place a credible plan to respect his promises and ensure that these 10,000 refugees will come to Canada over the next 3 years? Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, as of March 10th, Mr. Speaker, our commitment to resettle 1,300 refugees from Syria was met They have all been granted permanent residence. That's a commitment made, a commitment kept, Mr. Speaker. Canada has been and will continue to be a world leader in providing support for conflict-affected Syrians and Iraqis. And, Mr. Speaker, we are expanding our commitment to help Syrian refugees by resettling an additional 10,000 Syrians over the next 3 years. This brings Canada's total commitment to helping Syrian refugees, Mr. Speaker, to 11,300.
The honourable member for Halifax.
So according to the finance minister, because of falling oil prices, he can't do his job and table a budget. Yet yesterday, Alberta, which is far more dependent on oil, well, you know what they did? They tabled a budget. So something doesn't add up here. And it's not just the Conservatives' plan to take billions away from the middle class and give it to the wealthy few. The finance minister can't seriously expect Canadians to accept his worn-out excuse. When will he stop hiding and table a budget that stands up for Canadians?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know full well that we're in a fragile global economy, and of course this country has been severely impacted by the dramatic fall in oil prices. That is all the more reason to stick to Canada's action plan, to the government's low-tax plan that has generated 1.2 million net new jobs since the end of the recession. Mr. Speaker, it's because of actions like this that the overall federal tax burden is at the lowest in the last 50 years. Mr. Speaker, contrast that to an opposition that believes a $20 billion carbon tax would be the answer to the economy. Mr. Speaker, we know that that would cost jobs. They would raise...
The honourable member for Halifax.
Well, fine, that didn't really look like the finance minister. You know, in fact, the finance minister hasn't been responding for weeks, and he's only answered questions on 4 days this year. Nobody's buying that it's because he's too busy to draft a budget. I mean, what is he using, an abacus? He's getting out his pot of ink and his feather quill, you know, dab, 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 slide another bead across. Come on! Does anyone on that side get that Canadians want answers and they want action on a budget?
Hear, hear.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, our government has a low-tax plan that benefits all Canadians, a low-tax plan that helps our economy grow, Mr. Speaker, a low-tax plan that helps all sectors of the Canadian economy. That plan is working. It will return Canada to balanced budget this year. We will bring forward the budget. The minister has said not before April, but we reject the opposition's plans to tax more. They look forward to a budget because they view it as a way to take money out of the pockets of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, they believe their $21 billion carbon tax is going to help grow an economy. We know that it would cost jobs. We're going to keep on track, Canadians.
The honourable member for Rimouski, Nejet Témiscouata, Basque. Mr. Speaker, while the Minister of State is living in an imaginary world, we're living in the real world, and it's a real world where the provinces are able to table budgets, but it seems like the Conservative government can't do that. Weeks, the government has hemmed and hawed and delayed important investments for the middle class, investments that are needed now. For example, tax cuts for small businesses or measures to support manufacturers and create jobs. How many more weeks does the middle class have to wait before it will see a plan that will put families' priorities first? The Honourable Minister of Employment. We have taken the middle class to heart. We have reduced taxes for the middle class, and we have the child care benefit. We have a plan that is reducing taxes for families with income splitting, which will give up to $2,000 per family, and we have also increased up to $2,000 the funds for children under the age of 6 and $720 for children under the age of 16. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals and the NDP want to raise taxes and cut benefits to families, and we're not going to allow them to do that. The Honourable Member for Longueuil, Pierre Boucher. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, CBC Radio Canada announced that 244 more jobs would be cut, including 100 in French services. In Quebec and across Canada, the regions are the victims of the blind cuts of this Conservative government. In general panic, the management at CBC Radio Canada is getting rid of the next generation. Quebecers know that Radio-Canada is important throughout all the regions, across the province. Is the Minister of Heritage not embarrassed of these cuts to Radio-Canada? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, they can keep asking the question. The answer is going to be the same. CBC is responsible for its own operations. That's right. It's up to the CBC to provide programming that Canadians actually want to watch and listen to in both of our official languages. Our government provides the CBC with significant funding on a yearly basis. And, Mr. Speaker, if the member who sits on committee with me understood and certainly looked back, he'd understand and know that these changes are part of a strategic plan that the CBC went through in 2014 and is beginning to implement.
The Honourable Member for York West.
Mr. Speaker, despite announcing the Advanced Manufacturing Fund in March 2013, until today, not a single penny was spent from the fund, while our manufacturing sector in southwestern Ontario continues to suffer from Conservative neglect. It was only after the Liberals called them out on this neglect that the Conservatives quickly cobbled together today's announcement. So after 750 days of foot-dragging, can this government at least explain why are they making these companies pay federal tax on these loans just as if they were income?
Right. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this gives me the opportunity to inform the House that the government has announced today that we are investing in Hamilton's manufacturing sector through the Advanced Manufacturing Fund. This investment will support nearly 80 jobs and create countless others in the supply chain. Our government will continue to support policies that create jobs and grow the economy. But, Mr. Speaker, it's kind of interesting because the Liberal leader has said that Southern Ontario needs to, quote, transition away from manufacturing-based employment as a driver in the economy.
Honourable Member for Bourassa. Mr. Speaker, no government is more sensitive to the price of oil than the Alberta government. And yet, yesterday, they managed to table a budget, as did Quebec. Meanwhile, here, the Conservatives are still using oil prices as a pretext to delay the budget. Just excuses. It's clear that they have no plan for the economy. We need to create good jobs. We need to invest in infrastructure, and that takes federal leadership. Where is the Minister of Finance? Where is the budget for 2015? Honourable Minister of Employment. Mr. Speaker, the reason why the Liberals want a budget is because they want to increase taxes on Canadian families. Canadians don't want increased taxes from the Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal leader believes that budgets will balance themselves. That's not how it works. We have balanced our budget, and now we are helping families. We have reduced taxes on families with the family tax credit, and we have increased the child care benefit. This Conservative benefit, we are improving it, and we will continue to put money back into Canadians' pockets.
Member for Trinity Spadina.
Mr. Speaker, their budgets are so horrible, maybe we are better off without one. But Canadian cities don't get that choice. They have to present their budgets, and they've done it again on time, and something this government hasn't done. Their budgets are actually balanced. They don't get to play hide and seek like the finance minister. They also don't get something else from this government, infrastructure money. Because the balanced budget hasn't been presented, these cities haven't got money this year, and they didn't get money last year. That's no money for Vancouver, for Calgary, for Winnipeg, for Toronto, for Montreal, for Halifax. It's 2 years now with nothing. So Ollie Humphrey, can the finance minister come out from hiding under his desk? Can he...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That member may be interested in knowing these actual facts. First of all, the City of Toronto this year, Mr. Speaker, will receive $150 million through the gas tax fund alone. He may also be interested to know, Mr. Speaker, that since we formed government in 2006, Canada has consistently led the G7 with respect to investments in infrastructure as a percentage of GDP. Our average annual investments in infrastructure are 3 times greater than the previous Liberal government, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Beaches, East York.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative cuts to the CBC continue to damage the cultural fabric of Canada. Yesterday, CBC management announced 244 layoffs. This on top of the 400 jobs lost in October. This latest round strikes at the heart of local news services. Mr. Speaker, Canadians believe that our public broadcaster is important. That's why an NDP government will reverse the Conservative cuts and stand up for the CBC. Why won't the Conservatives get on board?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've responded to this question 3 times, but I tell you what will strike at the hearts of Canadians, not at the media, but at families, at children across this country, is the NDP is prepared to reinvest, or they say they're going to spend all kinds of money on Crown agencies. They're going to involve themselves in the day-to-day operations of them. And where are they going to get that money from? They're going to stop income splitting. They're going to prevent pension splitting from happening, Mr. Speaker, and they're going to reverse the child care benefit to all families across this country. We're not going to do that. We're about families. They can worry about things that are relevant to, not to families, but to anyone else who actually isn't concerned about how they would govern.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Yesterday's CBC layoffs will have a huge impact on Western Canada. In British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, another 76 jobs will be lost. Conservative cuts are simply destroying our public broadcaster. I hear it every day. Canadians understand the importance of quality local news and why we need a strong CBC. An NDP government will reverse the devastating $115 million that the Conservatives have cut from the CBC and stand up for the CBC. Mr. Speaker, when will the Conservatives just take their hands off CBC?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the only party in this House who allows the CBC to do their job and keeps their hands away from interfering on the day-to-day operations is the party on this side of the House.
Exactly right.
We've allowed this Crown agency. They certainly have faced difficulties, Mr. Speaker. The changes in technology, the changes in demographics, the viewership in terms of what people want to watch and how they watch, that is left under the jurisdiction of the CBC. Let them implement their plan. They put one into place in 2014, Mr. Speaker. Let's let this Crown agency do its job and not interfere on a political basis. It's not what we're going to do on this side. We know that's what they want to do on the other side, Mr. Speaker.
And I have an update of Portneuf-Jacques.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government is continuing to bleed Radio-Canada dry. The announcement will hit the regions really hard. For the French, in fact, Acadia, 10 jobs will be cut. Francophones in the Atlantic region have been fighting for centuries for their culture. They need a strong public broadcaster to support them. Doesn't the minister understand that Francophones will bear the brunt of these cuts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House completely understand the role of the CBC, and that's to act as an independent Crown agency to deliver service to people across this country. We understand the role that CBC plays in remote and minority language communities. That's why they get significant taxpayer dollars on a yearly basis. Let them do their job, Mr. Speaker. It's what they do. They're professionals. They understand how to deliver that service. It's not easy to do in the times that we face today. Let the CBC do its job.
The Honourable Member for Nickel Belt.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives don't understand anything. Cutting 244 positions means for people in my neck of the woods in Northern Ontario that 25% of positions will be abolished, a quarter of them. Francophones in Ontario need their TV and radio service in French. Will the minister stop gutting CBC, our public broadcaster, and finally reinvest in Radio-Canada CBC? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The government expects the CBC to fulfill its duty to provide quality programming to official language and minority communities under the Official Languages Act and the Broadcasting Act. The CRTC has expressed authority to ensure that the CBC is fulfilling its mandate under the law. We on this side of the House would like and let them fulfill that mandate, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to interfere with the day-to-day operations. It's obvious the other side of the House wants to do that. It's not our mandate to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government continues to stand up for hard-working Canadians. We have always believed that consumers should have more choice in choosing television channels, and that Canadians should only have to pay for channels they actually want to watch. Last week, we fulfilled this commitment. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage please tell the House more about this good news?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has said all along, and I thank the member for his question. It's a question that Canadians have been concerned about for years and was addressed last week, Mr. Speaker. Our government has said Canadians should not have to pay for the channels they don't want in order to get the ones they do. In our speech from the throne, we promised to provide consumers with more choice in channels. That's exactly what we've done, Mr. Speaker. This will not only give more choice to consumers, it'll help Canadian families make the best decisions on, guess what, Mr. Speaker, how to spend their dollars.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs shocked and deeply wounded Alberta First Nation leaders in alleging that unreleased RCMP data shows Indigenous men are 70% responsible for missing and murdered Aboriginal women. The RCMP have now directly contradicted this. I can personally attest, Mr. Speaker, to the relentless efforts of Alberta First Nation leaders, men and women, in seeking justice for their missing and murdered family members. And they have been relentless in calling this government to call for a judicial inquiry into missing and murdered women. Will this minister, who has made this shameful, groundless insult to Alberta First Nations, will he stand and apologize?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times in this House, violence against women and girls is simply not acceptable. This government has moved forward with an action plan, in fact, placed in this House in September of 2014. Unlike the opposition, who don't want to take action to actually help these women and their families, to make sure that they're protected, that shelters are created, or maybe supporting matrimonial property rights. This government is taking action to make sure that these heinous crimes are dealt with. The opposition just bury their heads in the sand.
The
Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Another file bearing the brunt of Conservative incompetency is Nutrition North. Recent statistics have shown that the number of households that can't afford healthy food in the North increased during the first year of Nutrition North. And we're not the ones saying this. It's Statistics Canada in its most recent report. So instead of continuing to boast about Nutrition North, will the Conservatives finally acknowledge their failure? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, si
Mr. Speaker, if the member and his party are concerned with the cost of food, healthy foods and helpful foods in the North, he could abandon his bill or project to adopt a carbon tax that would increase the cost of food in the North. The results are very clear. I will reiterate, with Nutrition North, the average annual volume has increased by some 25%, Mr. Speaker, and the cost of a basket of goods went from by $37 a month. That's indicative, and will continue in the same direction, working with the people of the North. The Honourable Member for Chambly-Bourdieu. Mr. Speaker, another example of Conservative incompetency is at the Champlain Bridge. Now, we've learned that the work is threatening the drinking water supply in Montreal. It will cost several $1 million to protect the Aqueduct Canal that provides half of Montreal's drinking water, and the city is calling on the government to provide some assistance. Will the government sit down, because we know he has trouble doing this, with the elected officials in Montreal to come up with a solution to deal with their lack of planning and protect drinking water for citizens of Montreal? The Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the honourable member that the Government of Canada is working very closely with both the City of Montreal and the Province of Quebec to make sure that the appropriate safeguards are in place, and we look forward to continued progress on this important project.
Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Speaker, the proposed memorial to victims of communism gets a failing grade in design, cost, and especially location. It is opposed by the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, the Ontario Association of Architects, the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, former directors of planning for the cities of Toronto and Vancouver, the Canadian Bar Association, the National Capital Commission, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the vast majority of the people of Ottawa. So the question is, why are the Conservatives ignoring all these voices and the democratic voices of the people of Ottawa?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, this memorial will honour the more than 100 million lives lost under the communist regimes. It'll pay tribute to Canadian ideals of liberty, democracy, and human rights. In Canada, over 8 million people trace their roots to countries that suffered under communism. Mr. Speaker, our government committed to honouring the victims of communism in our speech from the throne, and we look forward to fulfilling that commitment. Thank you.
The honourable member from Malpeque.
Mr. Speaker, this government's preoccupation to basically rob money from critical programs in order to give a tax break to the rich is beyond comprehension. One example is cuts to the RCMP. Commissioner Paulson informed us the RCMP had to take 300 personnel off criminal investigations and transfer them to anti-terrorism. Rank-and-file RCMP officers are calling for more training and better equipment, yet this minister has forced budget cuts of $290 million since 2012. Why is the government compromising the RCMP so it can give a tax break to the rich?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Public Safety.
That's absolutely false. We've actually increased resources to our national security agencies. But what is clear is that the international jihadist movement has declared war on Canada and our allies because of the values that we share. We only need to turn on the 6 o'clock news. We only need to read in the paper of another attack around the world, of more people leaving countries like Canada to join ISIL. We have heard credible witness testimony in committee this week that have confirmed that the threat is real, it has evolved, and it is growing. The number one priority of any responsible government is the safety and security of its citizens, and that is why this Conservative government will pass this legislation and why the RCMP is supporting it.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Mr. Speaker, of course the threat is real, but this government cut $290 million from the RCMP since 2012. That's unacceptable, and they're doing it in order to give a tax break to the rich. Beyond that, the RCMP rank-and-file members are now speaking out. They are mad, and they're feeling betrayed. They lack training, they lack equipment. The government has failed to honour the commitments they made to the Marathon recommendations, which cost RCMP lives. That comes out of the Moncton report. Why does this minister force cutbacks, put Canadians at risk, and even risks the lives of RCMP officers? Why?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's similar to the rhetoric we heard in committee this past week. But let me talk about one of the witnesses that did appear before committee, Inspector Irwin. More than 30 years of experience in law enforcement and intelligence gathering. What did this credible witness say about C-51? Existing laws are too restrictive and that there is an absolute need for the new measures contained within this bill. What else did he say about the need for information sharing? Absolutely crucial. And in general, with respects to the bill, contrary to what the opposition parties like to put out, he said it does provide the necessary safeguards. In the same meeting, Mr. Speaker, we heard opposition witnesses who said the bill had absolutely nothing to do with terror.
The Honourable Deputy Terrebonne-Blainville.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne-Blainville. The City of Terrebonne is calling for a moratorium on community mailboxes. Citizens are outraged by the lack of public consultation. Canada Post is not taking in any way into consideration the diversity of municipal realities, and in fact more than 200 cities are shocked and angry with Canada Post. Will the government finally comply with this request from the City of Terrebonne, or will they continue to push through with these community mailboxes without the agreement of the cities?
Honourable Secretary of Parliament.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, Canada Post delivered approximately 1.4 million letters fewer than in the past. Canada Post must balance its budget without being a burden for Canadian taxpayers, and we expect nothing less of it. The Honourable Member for Marc-Aurèle-Fortin. The Conservatives have not just failed to deliver the mail, but understanding accounting books for them are very difficult as well. People in my riding of Marc-Aurèle-Fortin reject the decision to put an end to home mail delivery. Canada Post has never been so profitable. In fact, we've learned that Canada Post this year has made a profit of $194 million. And despite this profit, they're putting an end to home mail delivery. That's quite something now, isn't it? Will the Conservatives finally listen to people and deliver the mail? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Remember that in 2014, that Canada Post delivered nearly 1.4 billion fewer pieces of letter mail than they did in 2006. That is a further and continued decline in that business, Mr. Speaker. Canada Post has decided it needs to continue to take its action, Mr. Speaker. That's why they have a 5-point plan. The remaining third of Canadians who don't receive mail at their mailbox, Mr. Speaker, that will proceed so that they will have daily mail on the same terms that 2/3 of Canadians currently receive it right now.
The honourable member for Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, our government remains committed to creating and maintaining jobs in Ontario's vital manufacturing sector. Earlier this morning, our government announced further support for manufacturers. Can the regional minister responsible for southwestern Ontario please update this House on this important announcement?
The Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Well, Mr. Speaker, today our government was pleased to announce that Fibercast will receive $10 million repayable contribution under the Advanced Manufacturing Fund. Mr. Speaker, this investment will help Ontario manufacturers create high-quality, high-paying jobs and compete globally. And while we're standing up for the manufacturing sector, the Liberal leader said that Canada needs to, and I quote, start transitioning away from manufacturing-based employment as a driver of the economy. Mr. Speaker, this is just further proof that the Liberal leader is an economic novice who isn't capable of managing the Canadian economy. That's right.
Mr. Labrador.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and the MP for Disinity, Nipissippi, Churchill River stated that RCMP statistics verifying their comment that 70% of missing and murdered Indigenous women were attributed to Native men would be released. Today, the RCMP says no, it will not. Why would the government members make that commitment and use the data in private meetings only to be overturned by the public, in the public by the RCMP? Will the minister make good on the commitment?
The Honourable Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier this week, last week I did a tour of the prairies and I met with several chiefs and councillors and stakeholders on the Aboriginal file to discuss a wide range of issues. And while I don't disclose specifics of closed-door meeting, I can assure the honourable member in the House that the discussions were productive and our government will continue to work with First Nations to address these issues.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, many people say that the riding of West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country is the most beautiful place on earth. Families in this riding, Mr. Speaker, are asking what can be done to help them in terms of tax relief and direct support. What they don't need is waste and new bureaucracies. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister for Employment can tell us what our government is doing to respond to families like those in West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
I'd like to thank the member for a challenging but thoughtful question, Mr. Speaker. We've balanced our budget, and now we're helping families balance theirs. Our low-tax plan will allow income splitting for parents to put up to $2,000 back into their pockets. We've increased the Conservative universal child care benefit to almost $2,000 for every child under 6 and $720 for every child 6 through 17. That means we put money directly in the pockets of families. While the NDP and Liberals would take that money away and raise taxes to fund new bureaucracies, we disagree. We are giving the dollars back to the more than 8 million real child care experts who are out there, and their names are Mom and Dad.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, by a majority of one judge, the Supreme Court just gave the Conservatives a green light to destroy the Quebec data for the firearms registry. But beyond the legal aspect, there's common sense. The federal government has an opportunity to prove that it can work in conjunction with the Quebec government to transfer the data instead of simply hitting the delete button. Why make Quebecers pay twice for something that already exists?
Parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
To thank the honourable member for that question. As I mentioned earlier today, the Supreme Court of Canada has been very clear on this matter, and we are pleased as a government with the decision on this particular issue. As I mentioned earlier, we have a strong system of gun control in Canada, and our government has toughened laws and penalties for those who commit crimes.
Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, on the Energy East pipeline file, we can see TransCanada's priorities. On one hand, the companies refuse to be transparent and is not providing people in my riding the documents in French. On the other hand, it's belittled an independent study commissioned by the elected officials of the MRC Autray who want to know the truth about the risks. What's the government waiting for to take some action to listen to the citizens and provide them with more information about the risks associated with the pipeline?
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The National Energy Board has fulfilled its requirements under the Official Languages Act. Any documents produced by the National Energy Board must be published in both official languages. Questions related to documents filed by an applicant should be directed toward the project proponent.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, last week we learned that the government, before it backtracked, wanted to cut 50 jobs in a federal sorting centre. 50 jobs set aside for people with intellectual deficiencies. Those jobs, appreciated and helpful for the people, are much more symbolic than a livelihood, and the salary was $1.15 per hour. Other people have the same concerns and are questioning this fact. Does the government think it's normal for people who are able and dedicated should be paid $1.15 an hour? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, there is nothing more inspiring than people who want to work, regardless of the challenges that life has presented them with. And that's the case with the 50 extraordinary workers who are serving the government and Canadians and have been doing so for 35 years. Their contract with the government had ended, and I'm happy to state that we will be extending it for another 3 years. The organization managing the salaries receives the funding directly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, what I was talking about was the fact that they were earning $1.15. That was the issue. Now, having said that, is there a policy for working with these people? Because it's not impossible. The goodwill just needs to be there. Will the government put forth a policy for persons with an intellectual deficiency with an adequate salary? The Honourable Minister of the Employment.
For the question, there's nothing more inspiring than people who want to work despite the obstacles that life puts in their way. Such is the case with roughly 50 excellent workers who have served the government and the people of Canada for over 3 decades in sorting, recycling, and shredding sensitive documents at Tunney's Pasture. Mr. Speaker, their contract was expiring. We have agreed to extend it for another 3 years. The salaries are set by the Association for People with Disabilities in order to avoid having provincial benefits clawed back. But we will continue to work to create jobs for people with disabilities.
Well said. That concludes question period for today. Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36.8, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 5 petitions.
Use your finger. Introduction of government bills. Ms. Finley, Haldeman Norfolk, for Mr. Blaney, seconded by Mr. Sorensen, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act and to make a consequential amendment to the International Transfer of Offenders Act. Cette motion est répétée adoptée.
This motion is deemed to be adopted. Ms. Finley, for Mr. Blaney, seconded by Mr. Sorensen, moves that this bill be now read a first time and printed. This motion is deemed to be adopted.
When shall the bill be read a second time? For the next sitting of the House.